What if being fiercely independent was never actually a strength? What if it was a scar wearing a strength's clothes? Why you'd rather struggle alone than ask for help? Why relying on someone else feels more dangerous than doing everything yourself? Why "I'm fine" comes out automatically, even when you're not, before you've even had time to check. Why you can manage a crisis at work without your hands shaking, but the thought of asking a friend for a favor makes your stomach turn. Why you've built a life where you don't need anyone, and somewhere underneath the pride in that, there's a loneliness you don't quite know what to do with. None of that is a personality trait you were born with. That's what happens when a child learns, early, that depending on adults doesn't reliably work. So the brain builds a permanent workaround, one that keeps running long after the situation that created it is gone. Some of these signs are obvious. Most of them aren't. Most of them look, from the outside, like maturity, like competence, like having your life together. That's exactly why they're so easy to miss, in other people, and in yourself. So here are 13 signs your childhood quietly built you into someone who never learned how to lean on anyone else. Not a flaw, a system, built for survival, still switched on long after it needed to be. The first one is small, and you probably don't even notice you're doing it. Someone asks how you're doing, really asks, with eye contact, waiting for a real answer, and "I'm fine" comes out before you've thought about it. Not as a decision, as a reflex. That's the part that matters. It's not that you're hiding something on purpose. It's that somewhere along the way, "I'm fine" stopped being an answer and became a door closing. A child who grows up in a house where big feelings weren't safe to show, where sadness got dismissed, or anger made things worse, or a parent's own stress filled up all the available room, learns fast that naming what you feel doesn't get you comfort. It gets you managed, or ignored, or it makes you responsible for fixing someone else's reaction to it. So the safest option becomes silence, dressed up as fine. The nervous system doesn't forget that lesson just because you grew up. It keeps applying it, automatically, in rooms where it isn't even true anymore, with a partner who would actually listen, with a friend who's asked more than once. You don't have to overhaul this overnight. Just start noticing the reflex itself. The next time "I'm fine" comes out on autopilot, pause for 1 extra second before you say it. Ask yourself, quietly, is that even true right now? You don't have to change your answer. Just start noticing there's a choice there at all. Because once you can see that first reflex clearly, the next one gets a lot easier to spot. Here's the next one. Someone offers to help you, carry something, cover a shift, just sit with you while you deal with a hard week. And instead of relief, what shows up first is guilt. A tight, uncomfortable feeling, like you're taking something you shouldn't. That reaction makes more sense once you look at where it usually comes from. If you grew up needing to earn attention or care, by being easy, by being useful, by not adding to anyone's load, then receiving help without doing anything to deserve it can feel almost wrong. Not logically, physically, like an alarm going off. Somewhere in that childhood, help wasn't just given. It had a cost, or it came with strings, or it simply wasn't there often enough for your nervous system to learn what it feels like to just be supported. No conditions attached. So your brain adapted the only way it could. If help feels unreliable or expensive, the safest move is never needing it in the first place. That's not ingratitude. That's an old rule your body is still running. One that made sense in a house where you had to keep the peace, and makes far less sense in a life where people actually want to show up for you. You don't have to force yourself to feel comfortable with it right away. Try something smaller first. The next time someone offers help, let yourself pause before you decline. Even just saying, "actually, yes," once, and sitting with the discomfort instead of the guilt, starts to teach your nervous system something new, that help doesn't always come with a bill attached. And if that one felt uncomfortably familiar, the next sign will probably feel even more so. Third one. Think about the last time something actually went wrong around you. An argument, a crisis, Someone falling apart. What did you do? If the honest answer is that you got calm, got practical, and quietly took over, while everyone else got to have their feelings, that's not just a useful skill. That's a role you've probably been playing since long before you were old enough to understand what you were doing. Psychologists have a name for this: parentification. It's what happens when a child ends up managing the emotional temperature of a household that should have been managing theirs. Maybe you were the one who calmed a parent down. Maybe you read the mood in a room before you could read a book, and adjusted yourself accordingly. Either way, you learned that your job wasn't to have a crisis, it was to handle everyone else's. And you got good at it. Frighteningly good, actually. Good enough that, as an adult, you're often the calmest person in the room during an emergency, while inside, something is still quietly asking, but who's going to hold this for me? That's the cost researchers keep finding in people who grew up this way. Real strengths, alongside a much harder time letting anyone care for them in return. If you're still watching, it means part of you already knows these patterns are real. Most people scroll past videos like this, but you're still here, which means part of you wants this to change. So subscribe, not for entertainment, but because change happens through repetition, and one reminder a week might be what pulls you out of a role you never should have had to play. There's a quieter version of this same pattern, and it shows up in a place you might not expect. Here's the next one, and it's one that often gets mistaken for good planning. You don't just prepare for what might go wrong, you run through it, in detail, before it's even happened. What if this falls through? What if they change their mind? What if I get sick right before the deadline? Your mind builds the worst-case scenario automatically, almost before you finished having the thought that triggered it. This is what's sometimes called hypervigilance, and it makes a lot of sense once you understand where it comes from. If you grew up in a house where things could shift without warning, a parent's mood, the money, the stability of the day itself, then constantly scanning for danger wasn't anxiety. It was information. It was how you kept yourself safe when no one else was reliably doing that job for you. A kid who learns to predict chaos before it lands has a better chance of getting through it in one piece. The problem is that this scanning doesn't come with an off switch. It runs in the background of ordinary, safe situations too, a normal work meeting, a relationship that's actually going fine, treating them with the same alertness you once needed for genuine unpredictability. You don't need to stop planning ahead. That instinct has real value. What helps is adding one question afterward. Is this preparation? Or is this my nervous system trying to control something that was never actually that risky? Naming the difference, out loud if you need to, starts to loosen the grip. And once you can catch your mind doing that, you'll probably notice it doing something else. 2. Something about memory. Try this for a second. Think of a specific moment from childhood when you were upset, and someone, a parent, an adult, actually sat with you, comforted you, made it better. Not fixed the problem for you, just made you feel less alone in it. For a lot of people who grew up this way, that memory is surprisingly hard to find. Not because it's been repressed or buried in some dramatic way, just because it's thin. There aren't many examples to reach for, so the search comes up mostly empty or vague, or replaced with a memory of comforting someone else instead. That's not a failure of memory. Memories get encoded more strongly when they're repeated and emotionally significant in a particular way. If being comforted wasn't a frequent experience, there simply isn't much of it stored to recall. This matters because that thin memory becomes a kind of template. If you don't have a strong internal reference for what being cared for feels like, it's hard to recognize it even when it's happening right in front of you. Now, a partner trying to comfort you, a friend checking in. Part of you might brush it off or feel oddly suspicious of it, simply because it doesn't match anything familiar. You can start building that reference now, even late. The next time someone offers you comfort, not advice, not a fix, just presence, Try to actually stay in it for a few extra seconds instead of deflecting. You're not just having a moment, you're slowly building the memory you didn't get enough of the first time. That gap in memory often shows up again in a different form, in how hard you work for other people. The next one shows up at work, in friendships, sometimes even with strangers. You help a lot, often before anyone's asked. You stay late to finish someone else's task. You check in on people who never check in on you first. And you keep doing it, past the point where it's actually sustainable, until you're running on empty and still saying yes. Researchers who study people who grew up parentified have a term for this: compulsive caregiving. It's not the same as generosity. Generosity has an edge, a sense of your own limits. This doesn't. If your early sense of worth came from being useful, from managing, fixing, easing someone else's load, then caregiving stopped being something you do and became something closer to who you believe you are. Stopping doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it can feel like you're disappearing. That's why rest doesn't fix this kind of exhaustion the way you'd expect. The tiredness isn't really about hours worked. It's about a much older belief running underneath all of it, that your value is conditional on what you provide. This one takes longer to shift than most, and that's okay. A small starting point. Before saying yes to something, pause and ask whether you actually have the capacity, or whether you're saying yes because saying no feels unsafe. You don't have to change the answer every time. Just start noticing which reason is driving it. Because that same question, am I doing this because I want to, or because I'm afraid not to, comes up again in the next sign, in an even quieter way. Here's a quieter one. You finally get a free afternoon, nothing urgent to do, and instead of relief, you feel restless, almost guilty. Some part of you starts looking for something to fix, organize, or check off, because sitting still feels less like rest and more like you're getting away with something. This connects directly to the last one. If usefulness was how you earned safety or approval as a kid, then your nervous system quietly learned an equation: doing equals safe, not doing equals at risk. Rest, in that equation, isn't neutral. It can register as a kind of danger, a moment where you're not proving your value, and some old part of you isn't sure what happens if you stop. This is different from being a naturally busy or ambitious person. The difference is the discomfort underneath it. Naturally driven people can enjoy stillness when it comes. For someone running this pattern, stillness triggers something closer to alarm, a felt sense that you need to earn your way back to being allowed to relax. You don't have to force a full day of doing nothing to work on this. Start smaller. 10 minutes of genuinely unproductive time. On purpose. And notice what comes up. The restlessness? The urge to check your phone or find a task? That's the old rule surfacing. You're not lazy for feeling it. You're just finally giving it room to be seen. And once you can sit with that discomfort for 10 minutes, the next sign gets a lot easier to recognize in yourself. This next one can be uncomfortable to admit, even to yourself. Somewhere underneath your relationships, there's a quiet question running in the background. If I stopped being useful, stopped helping, fixing, showing up for everyone, would they still want me around? That question doesn't come from nowhere. If love or attention in your childhood was tied to what you did, good behavior, good grades, being no trouble, being helpful, rather than simply who you were, then your brain learned a very specific lesson. Connection is conditional. It has to be maintained. It can be lost if you stop performing the role that earned it in the first place. As an adult, this often looks like overextending yourself in relationships that don't actually require it. Saying yes when you're exhausted. Avoiding conflict because you're afraid it will cost you the relationship entirely. Feeling a flicker of panic when you imagine someone being upset with you. It's not insecurity in the way people usually mean that word. It's a belief, formed early, that being loved and being useful are the same thing. They're not. But unlearning that takes practice, not just insight. One way to start: notice a moment when you did nothing to earn someone's affection, and they showed up anyway. Let that count as evidence. Collect a few more like it. You're not trying to convince yourself all at once. You're slowly building a different case than the one you grew up believing. That same fear of being replaceable shows up again, in a very different setting, inside your own head. Here's one that lives almost entirely inside your own head. When something goes wrong, you make a mistake, you're upset, you're overwhelmed. You don't really look for anyone else to help you through it. You just handle it, talk yourself down, figure out the fix, move on, quietly, without mentioning it to anyone. That instinct to self-soothe alone isn't a coincidence. It's a skill you built because, at some point, no one else was reliably doing it for you. A child who learns to calm themselves down without outside help is showing real adaptive intelligence. That's not a weakness, and it's genuinely useful in a crisis. The issue isn't the skill itself. It's that it became the only tool in the box, used even in moments when you don't actually have to be alone in it anymore. This is part of why some people who grew up this way can look completely composed during hard things, while feeling strangely distant from the people around them at the exact same time. You're technically fine. You're just fine by yourself, out of habit, even when someone right next to you would gladly help carry it. You don't have to abandon the skill. It will still serve you. But try practicing the opposite muscle occasionally. The next time you're spiraling or upset, instead of handling it internally like always, say one sentence out loud to someone else about what's going on. Not the whole story, just one honest sentence. That one sentence connects to the last sign on this list, the quiet cost of doing all of this alone for so long. Next one, handing something off to someone else. A task, a decision, a piece of a project makes you unusually uneasy, even when the other person is perfectly capable. So instead of delegating, you just keep it. Redo it yourself if it's not done exactly right. Take on more than you need to, because at least this way, you know how it'll turn out. This is really about control. And control, for a lot of people who grew up managing chaos they didn't create, isn't about being a perfectionist. It's about safety. If you grew up in an environment where things could fall apart without warning, and you were often the one left to catch the pieces, then staying in control of outcomes wasn't a preference, it was protection. Letting go of control meant letting go of your only reliable tool for keeping things from going wrong. As an adult, this can look like being an excellent, dependable leader on the outside, and being quietly exhausted on the inside, because you never really let anyone else carry weight with you. Not because you don't trust them specifically, because trusting anyone with something important once felt like a risk you couldn't afford. This is a slow one to loosen, and that's fine. Start with something small and genuinely low stakes. Let someone else handle one minor task their way, even if it's not how you do it, and resist the urge to redo it after. Notice that the world doesn't end. That's the evidence your nervous system actually needs, not just the logic. There's a related pattern, though, one that isn't about tasks at all. It's about how open you let yourself be with people. This one is harder to notice because it doesn't look like avoidance from the outside. You can talk for hours about work, ideas, other people's problems, even your own opinions. But there's a specific kind of openness that rarely makes it into the conversation. What you're actually struggling with, right now, underneath the surface. Even with people you're close to, a part of you stays back, not out of coldness, out of an old, well-earned caution. If vulnerability wasn't handled carefully when you were a kid, if sharing something tender got dismissed, used against you, or simply went unnoticed, you learned that being fully open comes with risk. So you built a version of closeness that feels safe, warm, engaged, generous even, but with one room in the house that stays locked. The tricky part is that this can go unnoticed for years, especially in relationships where you're doing everything else right. People can feel close to you and still sense, faintly, that something's being held back. And you might not even clock it as holding back. It can just feel like normal privacy. You don't have to fling that door open all at once. Try opening it a crack. With someone who's earned some trust, share one real, unresolved thing you're feeling, without immediately following it up with reassurance that you're handling it. Let the sentence just sit there, unfixed, for once. That same locked room is often exactly where the last, quietest sign on this list lives. Here's a strange one, but if you grew up this way, it'll probably land. Someone expresses concern for you, genuinely worried, asking if you're okay, wanting to help, and instead of feeling comforted, you feel a flash of discomfort. Almost an urge to reassure them quickly so they'll stop. That reaction makes sense once you see the role reversal happening underneath it. If you spent your childhood being the one who noticed when something was wrong with someone else, the one managing the worry, not the one being worried about, then having the roles flipped, even briefly, can feel deeply unfamiliar. Not bad, exactly, just wrong. The way a shoe on the wrong foot is wrong. Some part of you doesn't know what to do with being the object of concern instead of the source of it. So you do what you've always done. You take care of the moment. You minimize. You deflect. You shift the conversation back to being fine, partly to protect yourself, and partly, if you're honest, to take care of them, so they don't have to sit with worry on your behalf. This one is worth catching in real time. The next time someone says, "I'm worried about you," try resisting the urge to immediately smooth it over. Let there be a short, slightly uncomfortable pause where you just let them worry, without managing their feelings about it. That pause is the muscle you're building. And that exact discomfort, being cared for instead of doing the caring, is where the last sign on this list quietly lives. And here's the last one, the one that ties most of the others together. From the outside, your life probably looks like it's working. You're capable. People rely on you, and you rarely let them down. You've built something, a career, a home, a circle of people who genuinely care about you. And somewhere in the middle of all that, sitting right next to people who love you, you feel a loneliness that doesn't seem to have a clear reason. That contradiction is one of the most consistent findings in research on people who grew up parentified. Real strengths, independence, empathy, capability, sitting alongside a harder time with trust, with boundaries, and with letting connection actually reach them. Not because the people around them aren't safe, because the part of them that learned to survive without depending on anyone never fully got the memo that things are different now. That loneliness isn't proof that something's wrong with you, or that you're broken, or that you're doing relationships incorrectly. It's the leftover cost of a job you took on far too young, being the reliable one, the strong one, the one who didn't need anything, in a house where somebody had to be. You didn't choose that job, but you can choose, slowly, to stop being the only person allowed to take care of you. That doesn't happen through one insight or one video. It happens through small moments, repeated, letting someone help, letting someone worry, letting someone in, until the loneliness has less and less room to live in. None of this means the person you became is wrong. Independence, competence, the ability to hold yourself together, those are real strengths, and they got you through things that shouldn't have been yours to carry alone in the first place. This isn't about tearing that person down. It's about giving them a little more room than handle it alone as the only option. Real change here is quiet. It doesn't look like a breakthrough. It looks like one day you let someone help you with something small, and you don't feel guilty about it. It looks like resting without earning it first. It looks like saying one honest sentence about how you're actually doing, instead of the automatic, "I'm fine." You don't wake up a new person. One day, you just notice you recovered a little faster, needed a little less proof that people would stay, felt a little less alone, in a room full of people who care about you. You don't need to work on all 13 of these at once. Pick one. Just one. the one that felt the most familiar while you were watching this. And practice it today, in some small way. Subscribe if you want your mind working with you instead of quietly working against you. And if any of this sounded like someone you know, someone who's always fine, always capable, always the one holding it together, send them this video. They might need to hear that it was never really a choice.